Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to another week of programming here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. This is Bill O'Brien, and it is a Monday. Today is the 27th day of July. We are rapidly moving toward the end of the month. This is the 1st of August is this weekend, and the year just continues to fly by. I hope that you have been well, everyone, since we're last together this past Wednesday. I hope that your weekend was an enjoyable one. We had some of the best weather we've had all year here in the Appalachian region, but it keeps getting moved out by all of this humid, muggy air, and we've got it now. We're going to have some rain over the next couple of days, but then the last part of the week, second half of the week, looks pretty good in our area. I hope that whatever the weather in your area, I hope that you are personally doing well, and I want to thank you for your willingness to join us for yet another week of programming here at the Virtual Center. I invite you to participate actively in our program. We would love to hear from you, and if you recall our last time together, it seemed to me this past Wednesday, we did receive in the last 15 to 20 minutes of the program a call from our friend Horst in Taiwan, and it's just it's so pleasant to hear from listeners, but more important, it's a change of pace for the program that I think benefits all of us. I know it benefits me, but that's my interests are not really what's driving this thing. Hopefully, the Virtual Center exists because it's helping to meet some of your interests and your needs. That's the goal. That's what brought us on the air, brought us to this point, and that's what hopefully keeps us going. We would love to hear from you on our line. We have a dedicated line that will get you on the air. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-HORN, H-O-R-N, 4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me on some of the issues we're dealing with, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906 at gmail.com. waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906. That's all one word, lowercase, at gmail.com. And as you know, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we have had a Facebook page dedicated to the Virtual Center. And I invite you to visit that page. I have posted 4 or 5 of position papers or things that I've written over the months. A few of them were pieces that appeared in the Charleston Gazette here in recent months. A couple of them are opinion pieces on the issues that we continue to deal with here at the Virtual Center. I have found that when we spend significant time on a particular issue, when we work it over to the point that I feel that all of us have something to say, that we really at least have enough information to really begin to draw conclusions about the issue, then more often than not, I feel inclined, especially with our abbreviated schedule of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, that gives me Thursdays and Fridays to sit down and try to pull together and write up things. And with the Facebook page, it makes it possible to pull some of these things together and post them on Facebook, which essentially means, for all practical purposes, that we're capturing the essence of some of the issues that we're dealing with here on at the Virtual Center. At least that's the intent. That's why I wanted so badly to set up the page dedicated to the Virtual Center. So if you go to Facebook and type in the Virtual Center for Study of the Constitution, you will get the page. And if you scroll down, you will see with most recent entry first, you will see the 4 or 5 pieces that I've posted. Also, I've taken, if I can think of it, I've taken to the point that each evening before our next day's program, I try to remember to put a note on the Facebook page that indicates what the general topic of discussion on the next day's program will be. For example, last evening, I put a note on the Facebook page which indicated that Monday's program, today's program, would begin with a final comment or two on the situation, the Greek credit crisis that we've been dealing with now for well over 2 weeks. I guess probably closer to 3 weeks. This was really the theme, the topic of our discussion for the last 6, 7, even 8 programs, I believe. So this past Friday, Thursday and Friday, I sat down and tried to put together what I believed seemed to make some sense from the materials that we looked at, from the content, from the substance, the subject matter that we looked at. And I posted the page on Facebook, I believe Friday, could have been Saturday, I'm not sure. And then yesterday and this morning, I sat down and I took the same materials and I refined them a little bit, and with the idea that I would submit it for publication in our local paper, the Charleston Gazette. I might say that the Charleston Gazette Sunday edition yesterday, on July 26th, published a piece that I had sent them some weeks ago from our programming on the challenge to truth, the attack on hard science, and efforts to try to label hard science as junk science, the deniers, if you will. And I had submitted that piece to the Gazette about 3 weeks ago, and it was published in yesterday's paper. So if you have an opportunity to go to wvgazette.com and then look at the opinion pages in the Gazette, you will see the piece that I submitted listed there beside the date of July 26th. I might add a point and mention that there seemed to be a little bit of a snafu in the publication, in that one of the introductory sentences to one of the paragraphs at the front end of the article was omitted, and so that meant that two paragraphs were fused together in a way which really was quite confusing, and I was quite concerned about it. But then, as I read on, I began to realize that the bulk of the article, the last half or 2/3 of it, it seemed to me read. I was going to say read pretty well. Well, read as well as I could read it. Let me put it that way. But since then, I've sat down with after I posted the Facebook entry this past weekend on the Greek credit crisis. I sat down yesterday and spent quite a bit of time yesterday, last evening, and again this morning, making some revisions to what is on Facebook, with the idea that I would submit them this piece to the Charleston Gazette as well on the Greek credit crisis. I wanted to begin today's program by sharing that piece of writing with you for a couple of reasons. Not because I just wanted I wanted to run it by you, but I do. That's one of the reasons. And the reason I'm doing that is on the hope, or in hopes that if there's something in there that strikes your fancy, or something in there that you have questions about, or that you're not sure about, or that you question, I really do hope that you will avail yourself of the opportunity to pick up the phone and give us a call and just briefly say, hey, relook at that again, because I'm very, very willing to do that. So I so trust the folks that listen regularly here to the Virtual Center, that I feel that what I do, I really one-on-one run by the people that I trust as much as I've ever trusted anybody in my academic career. I will say that. So again, our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. And if there's something in the piece that I'm going to share with you momentarily, I really do hope that you'll flag it and let me know, and at least give me a chance to make some corrections or to rethink the way that I have phrased or presented a particular idea or thought. As I mentioned last evening on the Facebook page, I tried to spell out what today's program would be about, and at the beginning I put that we would begin the program with a final comment or two on the Greek credit crisis, and of course that I had in mind the piece that I had just finished. That I would open today's program with that, and then we would return to the so-called climate deception dossiers, the 380 pages of internal documents that were released earlier in July, about a month ago now, about 3 weeks ago, by the Union of Concerned Scientists. Internal documents from the fossil fuel industry about their efforts to sow doubt and to counter hard science on the issue of climate change. I think these documents are incredibly revealing. They're extremely informative. I believe they're explosive, to be honest with you. We did begin to get into these this past Wednesday, but we began late in the program, and then, as I mentioned, Horst's call in the last 20 minutes of the program kind of suspended our attention on those. And but I mentioned to Horst then that was really no problem, because we'd get back this week and we'll revisit those documents and spend today's program and probably tomorrow's as well on these dossiers. So if you're interested in maybe giving a few of these documents a read before we get to them on the air, you might on your laptop or on your desktop, you might Google in climate deception dossiers, and you will find the documents there listed or posted online by the Union of Concerned Scientists. And I spent quite a bit of time about 10 days ago going through those documents and selecting the 3 or 4 that I thought would be most pertinent and most relevant to issues that we care most about here at the Virtual Center, with the idea that we would be devoting a couple of programs at least to the content of these programs. Given what we've already done with the tobacco industry 2 weeks ago, before we began to deal with Greece, if you remember, we dealt with this effort to counter we called it the attack on truth, so to speak, and we focused on materials from the tobacco industry. But as you know, since that time, the Union of Concerned Scientists has posted all of these documents that just became available through lawsuits filed under the Freedom of Information Act. And so it seems to me that the content of these documents seems to warrant a revisit, if you will, to the issue of deception and efforts to manipulate and control public opinion by industry. I think before getting into the thing on the issue on the Greek debt crisis a little bit, I just wanted to make a comment on this, about this climate issue. It seems to me, and I'm making it now because I'm afraid when we get to it later in the program I'll neglect to mention this, but I just wanted to call your attention to something that's very obvious, and I'm sure most of you know it anyway. But all of this material that we have looked at and that we will continue to look at on the issue of deception related to climate and all the rest of it, all of this, it seems to me, has adopted or has assumed much greater meaning, it seems to me, much more impact, because of the publication about a month ago of the Pope's encyclical on climate. It seems to me that what the Pope has done with that encyclical is to basically lay out not only some of the science, what the science is telling us about climate and man's role in polluting the climate and jeopardizing the environment, But what the Pope has indicated also is an indication of the campaign of those whose vested interests lie in finding ways to refute or to deny this kind of science. And so I think, with the background of the Pope's encyclical, it seems to me, all of these documents, all of these contents have assumed a much more significant, much greater significance than they would have if the Pope had not released the Laudato Si encyclical. But be that as it may, let me take the program into some final comments, a final word or two, as it were, about the Greek credit crisis, and more specifically, I'd like to do it by sharing with you a piece that I've put together based on the recent programs we have. And again, this particular entry or portion of the program seems to me to have more than one reason for being our intent. My intent here, obviously, is to ask for your input and your reaction to some of the things that I think I can honestly say, and I've tried to do the best job I can, but I trust that you can tell me that because many of you have been with us throughout our examination of some of this material. But the other thing, which is much more pertinent to the program itself, is it's a pretty good, it seems to me, summation or review of some of the material and some of the issues we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks. It seems to me, pulls all of this stuff together in one package. And then when we leave it and go on to the issue of climate and the efforts of climate deniers to deny science, it seems to me that we'll have left the Greek credit issue with a package that we can pretty much put a ribbon around. So that's really my intent, is to use this as a form of summation of that particular topic at the same time that it is presented here at the Virtual Center as an opportunity or a solicitation request for your input, especially if there is something in this particular piece that you find that you're uncomfortable about it, that you find questionable, or that you have some comment on. I wrestled quite a bit with a title for this piece, and the title I came up with, and I think those of you who were with us when we dealt with the Pope's encyclical will recognize where I finally ended up going for a title that seemed to me to capture the essence of what this is about. The title that I've come up with is Economic Policy Less a Moral Dimension. And of course I got that from the Pope's idea that most economic decisions in today's world are being made without inclusion of the so-called moral dimension. The result is that these are very hard-nosed, bottom-line, quantitative, substantive, data-driven decisions. And of course what the Pope's encyclical does is urge the introduction or the inclusion of the moral question, the issues of morality and ethics, into some of these economic decisions. Once you do that, then it seems to me you are forced to consider the impact of these decisions on people, not just people in this country, as we know, but people throughout the world. And that's the Pope's message. That's really what the Pope is encouraging us to do. So I call this piece Economic Policy Less a Moral Dimension. And this is my effort to summarize the last couple of weeks of our programs here at the Virtual Center. From beginning to end, it seems, the Greek debt crisis has pretty much defined the month of July 2015. What seemed simple, clear-cut issues at the outset, creditors demanding their due, debtors predicting default, became by mid-month a much more complicated affair, with fiscal and political implications that extended well beyond Greece. Though inconceivable initially, The crisis metastasized in only a few short weeks into a model case study in 21st century global economics and international crisis. As pundits and their critics found unique ways to take basic issues in unanticipated directions, the controversies unleashed and complexities bared revealed serious flaws in and raised ominous flags about international understanding and goodwill. These ranged from deep quality of life inequities between debtor and creditor nations to substantive questions concerning the future viability of nation states in a world dominated by benchmarks and bottom lines and seemingly defined by contractual obligations devoid almost entirely of moral considerations or sensitivity to human need. From indications of extreme nationalism's rebirth in the face of growing political ineptitude to entrapment in ever deeper debt and look-good schemes that usually turn into snares and not solutions. From the infectious attraction of self-interest and its all-consuming tendency to defer attention to the public interest, to capitalism's heightened emphasis on short-term gain, accountability to shareholders over workers, more production from fewer workers, and the insatiable search for higher-order cognitive talent that's increasingly rare and dear. And of course the use of dear means that talent costs money. And that's where most of the high-end salaries in today's technological world are located. In better than 2 full weeks of interactive conversation and dialogue on the Internet, the issue that seemed to garner the most attention, however, the froms and twos above notwithstanding, was less well-known information on the behavior of prominent Wall Street firms. The behind-the-scenes, under-the-radar investment adventures of well-known firms like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan. Turns out, thanks to information provided by Robert Reich, former Labor Secretary under President Bill Clinton, that these firms were heavily involved in the Greek crisis, as well as much closer to home, debt restructuring schemes modeled on their activities in Greece. But first things first, about Greece. Robert Reich reports in the New York Times, his article is dated July 14th in the New York Times, Reich reports that the severity of the Greek crisis stemmed in large part from a questionable, legal but not quite ethical, cross-currency swap arrangement in 2001, which effectively shifted 2% of Greece's international debt into what showed up on the books as domestic debt. To foreign creditors, this portion of Greece's debt mysteriously disappeared. The nation's public debt management head at the time called it, quote, a very sexy story between two sinners, unquote. The return to Goldman Sachs from this venture, $793 million. By 2005, after 9/11, and a precipitous freefall in the bond market, Greece's original debt of 2.8 billion euros had ballooned to 5.1 billion euros. With debt restructuring, Greece was forced to adopt the austerity program of public sector layoffs, pension and education cuts, and social services cutbacks it has labored under since then. Now it appears that the nation, already suffering unemployment rates above 25%, will be forced to bite the bullet even more. Some experts even suggest that a Greek exit, termed a Grexit, would be best for all involved. A key point here, one that often goes overlooked, is that despite the severe budget cutting underway for so long in Greece, and we learned from the experts, Paul Krugman, Robert Samuelson, Harold Meyerson, Joseph Stiglitz, David Ignatius, in other European nations as well, the money not spent does not go to Greece, but to its creditors. From the revenue a shrinking economy generates, creditors get theirs first. The balance, if there is any, makes it into the Greek economy. One final point of information. Mario Draghi, current head of the European Central Bank, so prominent in holding Greeks' feet to the fire, was then, in 2005, managing director of Goldman's International Division. When we shift back home to what's happening here in the USA, Robert Reich reports, we find Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and others engaged in fashioning like financial arrangements within our states and cities. In Detroit, for example, which filed for bankruptcy in 2014, its water company was forced in 2012 to pay fines to Goldman and other banks of $547 million to terminate interest rate swaps. Chicago's school system is faced with a similar $200 million termination penalty for a swap arrangement that was costing the system $36 million a year. In Oakland, California, Goldman is demanding a $16 million termination fee for a deal more than 10 years old that has cost the city $4 million a year for the last decade. It's hard for all of us not to wince a bit when we remember that American taxpayers rescued Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and others after the 2007-2008 recession. Yet now they seem reluctant to return the favor. So what's going on? Why do cities, states, entire nations find themselves drowning in debt? Turns out that the need for operating capital is the answer. The only monies available to operate, it seems, pay salaries and pensions, fix roads and bridges, keep schools open, keep policemen and firemen on the job, comes from low-interest loans from private banks, with national and municipal public assets and services as collateral. Let me pause here and just make a parenthetical comment. There are two issues here, it seems to me, that last sentence brings to the fore. One is that these governments, whether they be state, municipal, or entire nations like Greece, Finland, the Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, whatever, these nations are relying on loans from private banks in order to get their hands on operating capital so the government can continue to function. But the other thing to keep in mind is that these cities, states, or nations are being forced to sell off their assets, their public assets. We called it here at the Virtual Center the Commons. These governments are being forced to sell off their assets as collateral for the loans. So the damage is being doubled, if you will. Not only are we borrowing from private banks, but we're putting up public assets as collateral. Back to the text here. As strategy for controlling inflation and regulating economic expansion, the Basel Committee, an international organization of financial managers, urged member nations as early as the 1970s to avoid issuing additional money or borrowing from their own central banks when they needed operating capital. Instead, they were urged to borrow from the market, private banks. Now we know why the pundits worry that Greece will be forced to sell off its national assets, why states and cities are being forced to convert their resources, public lands, timber, water, oil, natural gas, coal, even public services like healthcare, education, senior citizen services, and prisons, into commodities with a fixed market value to get their hands on needed operating capital. Truthout.org, which is an online journalistic publication, Truthout.org reports that even food production has shifted to international corporate control, wherein food commodity traders and so-called hedgers determine available supply rather than the real-world need or demand for food. The Bank of England has recently acknowledged that the vast majority of the world's circulating money supply is now created by private banks. But why? In 2012, Forbes magazine reported that American corporations were sitting on more dollars than ever in their history. $1.45 trillion. Untold dollars are sitting in overseas tax shelters and going into obscenely high CEO salaries. If corporations are currently making record profits, where in the world are those dollars? Pounds, euros. If the global markets are really functioning as the textbooks say they do, then wouldn't these record profits surface as reinvestments in an expanding global market? Jobs would be appearing. Salaries would be increasing. The good life for the 99% would be as visible as it seems to be for the notorious 1%. Where is trickle down? Why aren't real benefits from real expansion trickling down to the rest of us? Why aren't producers following through on the promises of supply-siders to create demand through expanded production? Why instead are we being asked by Jeb Bush to work longer? Finally, it seems, we are seeing these theories for what they were from the very beginning: frauds. David Stockman, Reagan's own OMB director in the early 1980s, labeled them a Trojan horse. To candidate George Herbert Walker Bush, they were voodoo economics. To the late John Kenneth Galbraith, he saw them as horse and sparrow economics. Feed horses enough oats, and you're guaranteed that the sparrows will eat. Perhaps the most ominous result of what the Greek crisis has wrought for all to see is the absence of any meaningful real-world outcome from the 61% no vote registered 2 weeks ago in Greece's referendum on the demands of creditors. Is that vote the effective end of democratic government as we've known it? If so, it's rather appropriate, since after all, democracy began there. For those of you who might be tuned in here at the Virtual Center today, and were not or could not be with us in previous weeks when we looked at a lot of this material and a lot of this content and discussed it and discussed its implications and its meanings for Greece and for the world we all live in, then I think that particular piece, my effort there, and a little bit better than 2 pages of text, was to capture what I've seen have been the highlights from the last couple of weeks of broadcasts here at the Virtual Center. In a sense, I am looking at this particular piece as a summation of our programs over the last 3 weeks or so, ever since the Greek crisis really broke on the world stage, which was, as you know, early in July. Here we are today, the 27th of July. We have not even completed a full month. And there's absolutely no question that the Greek crisis has been dominating the media, has been dominating the newspapers and journals since that time. It seems like there's so much there, and the implications are so significant that different experts from different areas have been able to find within the crisis material that seems to be relevant for their particular area of interest. It's not easy to try to pull all of that together and capture it all in a way which seems to make sense to most of us. I hope that I've been able to do that. Again, our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. We're just a little bit beyond the bottom of our first hour. It's right now 37 minutes after the hour, so we've been on the air today now for going on 40 minutes. I think it's a pretty good effort to capture, to summarize our programming over the last several weeks. If there are things in there that you are uncomfortable with or that you have questions about, then by all means avail yourself of the phone number and share them with us, not just with me, but with our other listeners as well. Because barring any kind of critical reaction or recommendations for serious change, I'm planning over the next 2 days, if you will, to give this piece one more careful reading in order to edit out any grammatical errors that I might have put in there. And then I'm going to submit it. So basically, if it's accepted for publication in the Gazette, then my name will be on it, and I'm going to have to live with the results. So if there are problems in it, and you happen to see what they might be, and are kind enough to share those with me now, I would thoroughly appreciate it. I'm sure that others listening to our program would as well. Again, our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. If you don't want to do it on the air and you'd like to just drop me an email and share your thoughts that way, then I would welcome that as well. And again, my email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. Assuming or barring a call or a comment, then it seems to me that we can kind of tie a bow on the Greek credit crisis, at least for the moment, and move into yet a totally different topic, which is the climate deception dossiers that we touched upon and began to introduce last week in our programs. I think, again, that and this what I'm about to say right now is something that just occurred to me. I didn't have it down. I didn't have it planned or anything else. But I'm right at the point of transitioning articles and documents written on the issue of the Greek credit crisis into a series of internal documents written within the fossil fuel industry as efforts to build a strategy to counter science, which was challenging the economic viability and financial future of this industry. It's important to recognize how many people these issues affect. Think for a moment, and again, I hadn't thought about this before we went on the air, I'm just thinking about it now. But think for a moment about the number of people that are involved that earn their living in one aspect or the other of the fossil fuel industry, whether it's gas, coal, oil, whatever it is. Think of the number of people involved in the transportation of, the extraction of, the sale of, the investments of, etc., etc. We're talking about an industry that has driven the economic development of the Western world for the last century and a half or so. 2 centuries, perhaps. So it involves an awful lot of people. It affects an awful lot of lives. When you attack it, when you challenge it, you threaten people's very livelihood. It stands to reason that their natural inclination would be to deny. Their self-interest would indicate that they should deny. And to be basically honest about it, if I were earning my living, my livelihood, from the fossil fuel industry, I live in southern Appalachia. Obviously, the issue of concern here is coal and the Marcellus Shale and the gas that is being extracted from the Marcellus Shale and the extent to which it is overwhelming the coal industry. And what is happening in the coal industry to the people who have earned their livelihood from that industry for the last 100+ years here in Appalachia. Before I'm willing to buy the legitimacy of the concerns, I want the evidence to be overwhelming. In other words, you've got to prove to me with absolutely no doubt included that what I'm doing is making people sick and costing people their lives and their health and their futures and everything else. If I'm participating in the destruction of the planet, then I want to make sure that the evidence that I'm doing that is absolutely, unquestionably irrefutable. The other side of that is that I'm looking for any evidence available that what's being alleged is not true. I'm looking for evidence, not a whole lot, just a hint, that there are self-interested agendas driving science that might raise questions about the legitimacy, my tongue got in front of my eye teeth and I couldn't see what I was saying. There are serious questions about the legitimacy of the science. If there's any indication of that at all, then I'm going to jump all over it and I'm going to welcome it. I'm going to embrace it. Because literally what it does is raise questions about those who are accusing me of destroying the planet we live on. That mentality, that reality, makes me extremely receptive to the deniers, to organized efforts to convince me that what the climate scientists are telling us may not be totally valid. That's what I want to hear. That's what I'm looking for. So obviously, when I hear it, I'm going to be receptive to it. I think as we look at these internal documents from the industry, within the industry, one of the things that becomes very clear in all of it is that those driving the marketing initiative within the fossil fuel industry are quite cognizant of, are very cognizant of the realities of the receptive market that they've got out there. There are so many people that are so dependent on this particular industry for their livelihoods that we've got a receptive audience if only we can tap into it. If only we can develop it. If only we can educate it. Consequently, we, as members of the industry, have a lot going for us. The other side's got science. But the fact of the matter is, most people who walk the face of the earth aren't scientists. Most people don't really understand science at all. Most people out there don't know scientists personally. Most people out there can't even relate to the personalities which are developing this kind of science on climate and environment. Basically, all they've got is hard science. What we've got on our side is the will, the inclination, the willingness to support our efforts to defend the industry. We've got everything going for us except the science itself. If we can poke holes in the science, we win. We don't have to come up with alternative science to prove that the hard science is wrong. We don't have to go that far. All we've got to do is poke holes in it, because most of the people out there want to believe us anyway. So all we've got to do is come up with enough that is enough to be somewhat credible. Credible. And we win. I think that effort to frame the situation psychologically is really significant, because it's the mentality, the industrial mentality, that drives this whole internal effort to deny climate science, to deny the hard science. They've got a receptive audience. They've got seemingly unlimited amounts of money to pay for the campaign. They've got whatever funds they might have to be able to sign up scientists and others who are more than willing to sell out their souls, so to speak, for the amount of money that we can bring to the table. We can buy university scientific research. For a song, everybody knows that higher education is having budget problems. States all over the nation are cutting back on their allocations to public higher education. Universities are being forced to raise tuition to obscene levels as the responsibility for higher education is being shifted from government, from the states, to individual students. Everybody knows then that higher education is in trouble. They're trying to get their hands on dollars, on revenue, anywhere they can find it. If we come along with significant grant opportunities, entire departments in colleges and universities are more than willing to draft proposals in order to secure one or more of our grants. They want to take their money because they want to take our money because they need it. So we don't have any trouble finding people to do our bidding. And all we've got to do is come up with enough to raise questions about what the other side is alleging. We don't have to disprove them. All we've got to do is poke holes in the case they're trying to sell to the general public. It seems to me that recognition of that psychological reality, as I see it, seems to suggest that the deniers, the industry and spokesman for proof, it seems to me, clearly is falling on the side of those who would try to argue that human behavior is destroying our planet. We got so many people that are depending on the industry we represent, that these people are leaning 75% our way to begin with before we do anything. If you take an analogy from Wimbledon, advantage industry. And I think that's extremely important to recognize. As we mentioned last time, and I think this is good because it puts the whole campaign into perspective, the issue which seems more than anything else to have kicked off the industry in the direction that produced this effort at denial occurred in December of 1997 when the Clinton administration brought into the Kyoto Protocol. If you remember, representatives of developed nations from around the world met in Kyoto, Japan in 97, and they developed targets for pollution reduction of carbon dioxide in the environment. And in some cases, the targets that nations agreed to try to reach were significant. It wasn't the idea of undoing pollution, but it was the idea of making the kinds of changes in the way we do business that would have significant impact on reducing the amount of pollution that the fossil fuel industry in our country is creating. That's the agreement that the Clinton administration came back to the United States with from Kyoto. That occurred in late 1997. It's in response to that that the industry kicked its effort to counter that into high gear. And early in 1998, the American petroleum industry took up the gauntlet of Kyoto. And of course, as we know, members of the American petroleum industry include Peabody Energy Coal, included major coal companies, included most of the major oil companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, ConocoPhillips, BP, all of them. And the American petroleum industry in April of 98, in other words, less than 5 months later, put out an outline of a strategy, a program to counter the science in order to curtail support for Kyoto. And these are the documents that have become available primarily through Freedom of Information Act legal actions on the part of the Union for Concerned Scientists. These are the documents, it seems to me, that we're looking at. We've got less than 4 minutes left in this first hour of broadcasting. What I'd like to do is I'd like to share, and this is a repeat because we looked at this before, but I'd like to look at the action plan put together by the American Petroleum Institute in 1998, principally to share with you the measures that will indicate our success as an industry. Victory for us, for the petroleum, for the fossil fuel industry. Victory will be ours when we can claim that the following has happened. First, average citizens understand, recognize uncertainties in climate science. Recognition of uncertainties becomes part of conventional wisdom. In other words, when enough people begin to question the validity of the science, which is accusing us of destroying the planet, we will have won. When we can create enough of that doubt, we win. Second, when the media understands and recognizes uncertainties in climate science, when not only average citizens, but the media begins to raise questions about the validity of climate science, victory will be ours. We will have won this battle when media coverage reflects balance on climate science and recognition of the validity of viewpoints that challenge the current conventional wisdom. When the media is able to say there are two sides to the story, and both of them, under our commitment to freedom of speech, both of them have the right to be heard equally and fairly. When we get that, we've won. We will have won when industry senior leadership understands uncertainties in climate science, making them stronger ambassadors to those who shape climate policy. We will have won when senior executives in our own industry begin to feel comfortable enough to stand up and defend us. The indication is that too many of the senior administrative leaders of the companies in the industry have been driven by the evidence into silence and reticence. We've got to give them enough ammunition that they can stand up and defend themselves, defend us. And when that happens, we'll be able to claim victory. And finally, we'll win when those promoting the Kyoto Treaty on the basis of extant science appears to be out of touch with reality. When society in general begins to believe that those who support the Kyoto Protocol, the Kyoto Treaty, are crackpots, are nuts. When we reach that point, that public opinion looks at the climate advocates as crackpots, as radicals, as tree huggers, as environmentalist do-gooders. When public opinion is willing to paint them into a corner as crackpots, we will win. If you look at those 5 objectives or measures of a successful industry campaign, it seems to me that the psychological perspective, which I tried to share a little bit earlier, seems to have much more meaning and much more credibility. The other thing is, when you look at the specifics of these measures of victory, it seems to suggest an awful lot about the nature of the campaign that the industry plans to wage. If public opinion is going to end up believing that the people who most support Kyoto are crackpots, then by definition, the industry is saying our campaign is going to be aimed at labeling them crackpots. Our campaign is going to be aimed at convincing the general public that they are crackpots. I think then, before we look at the first document, we can begin to appreciate that there are some serious ethical and moral conclusions or dimensions to this campaign. Even before we look at any of the specifics of what the industry plans to do, it's very obvious to me that what they are planning has serious ethical implications. If you are setting out to so destroy the credibility of your opponents that the general public is going to try and conclude that they are nutcases and crackpots, then it doesn't say very much for the ethical substance of the campaign you are planning to wage. I think we know that going in. With that, then, let's bring this first hour of the Virtual Center program today to a temporary close. It's 4 minutes after the hour right now. We're going to pause for a 5-minute break. Then we'll come back and we'll have the bulk of our second hour to get into some of the substance of this particular campaign. I think it's just interesting stuff. The material itself is delicious. It is just wonderful stuff in terms of interest. With that, please stay with us. You're listening to the Virtual Center. We'll be right back after a short break.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Here again is Dr. Bill.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome back to our second hour here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I hope that for those of you who are still with us from the first hour, I hope that you enjoyed the short break as much as I did. I was telling Bob in a comment here on the internet, in a chat, just a moment ago as the music was playing, that, oh my God, is it hot here? But the place I am is not insulated, which means that it's a boxed in or a walled in what used to be a porch, a side porch. And without insulation, it gets so warm here in the summertime. And of course, on the other side of the coin, it gets so cold here in the wintertime. But today, it is so hot and humid. Now the sun's out. It was cloudy most of the morning, and now the sun's out. The humidity's high. The temperatures are up, and it is quite warm. And of course, I tend to get a little bit animated by the material. So the fact of the matter is, it's particularly warm here. And again, but on the other hand, I feel like a pitcher that's on is about halfway, a little bit less than halfway toward throwing a no-hitter. You know, I know there's a long way to go, a full hour of our program left, but on the other hand, I feel that the material is so interesting that I can't wait to get to it. If that makes sense, I'm getting excited about it. Of course, that makes it even feel a little bit even hotter than it is. But it's a good hot, if that makes sense. I hope that you agree. Anyway, welcome. Thank you so very much for your continued support, not only for the Virtual Center, but for the Head On Radio Network itself. I know, like most of you who follow the Head On Radio Network and who follow Bob Kincaid on Facebook, I know that you noticed over the weekend his effort to try to solicit some funds in order that the network not fall too deeply into a funding hole. And I just want to reiterate that because again, we don't have advertisers. We don't we depend on the people who tune into the program to keep it on the air. So I know it kind of gets painful sometimes and a little bit old to continue to hear a pitch for money. I know that people have said that for years when I used to be on public television and on public radio for public broadcasting. People so dislike those pledge periods 3 or 4 times a year. But the fact of the matter is, so much of public broadcasting's budget comes from listeners that it's absolutely vital that they do that. Otherwise, the whole nature of the programming itself would change. Even more so, that's the way it is here at the Head On Radio Network. So I encourage you, if you can find any way at all to spring for a few dollars one way or the other and help out Bob Kincaid and his folks as they try to make ends meet here at the Virtual Center. I know that he'll appreciate it. I want you to know that I will as well. We do invite your calls and your participation in our program. I remind you that our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-HORN, HORN. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. And again, I remind you of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution Facebook page. There are a number of postings listed there which relate directly to some of the issues that we've addressed in the past here at the Virtual Center, and it will continue to do that. And as you know, if you are a regular user of Facebook, and I'm not, I've only been at it a couple of weeks, but those of you who've been at it much longer know that with every entry, there's a comment space, an opportunity for you to comment, and I invite you to do that. So again, when you look at the phone number and my email address and the Facebook page, it seems to me there's a number of places where you can offer us your ideas and your suggestions and your thoughts so that we can continue to work to make what we're doing here on the Head On Radio Network and specifically here at the Virtual Center, which I'm responsible for, as good as we can make it in terms of broadcasting. So thank you. And with that, I'd like to get into our program, into our second hour. And more specifically, I'd like to get into the specifics of the campaign to counter the December 1997 Clinton administration agreement, or signing on, if you will, to the Kyoto Treaty. And I think I mentioned this particular survey before. It's mentioned in the literature leading up to the documents. This is all the introductory material about the origins of the plan. And the reason I share this with you is because it seems to reinforce the effort I made in our first hour to try to lay out or present what I see as the psychological context within which the industry, the fossil fuel industry, is developing and implementing this strategy, this plan. The official title of the plan, the draft is called a Global Climate Science Communications Plan. This is the industry's plan, April 1998. And as part of the introductory material to the plan itself, the author of the plan, the person that pulled it all together and wrote it, whose name is Joe Walker, apparently, at least he signs the introductory letter, Joe Walker makes readers of this plan aware of a research survey called the Charlton Research Survey of 1,100 so-called informed Americans. And what the results of that survey suggest is that while Americans currently see climate change as a great threat, public opinion, according to the survey, remains open enough to change on climate change. Translation: those who would hurt us have done serious damage to our industry, but they haven't won yet, because this survey indicates that there's still some soft areas here in public opinion. There's still an opportunity for us to counter. The climate folks believe that they're way ahead and they've made inroads, especially with Kyoto. They feel that they've achieved a major victory. But our research indicates that the game's not over yet. And as we looked just prior to our break at the top of the hour, we have certain indicators or certain measures, 5 of them, which will indicate when they are achieved, we will win. We will have won. And so with that, here's the outline of the plan. Here's the outline of the industry's communication plan. As far as strategies and tactics are concerned. First, a national media relations program. A full-blown, all-out program to conduct and support a media blitz in order to inform the media about uncertainties in climate science, thereby, by using the media, reach and help to educate and inform the general public, encouraging them to raise questions with policymakers, which would be Congress, which would be the administration, etc. That's the strategy. That's the goal for the media relations portion of this overall plan. And of course, once that plan is refined, then we'll secure funding for it. What is the first ingredient or the first activity, if you will, associated with that plan? In order for this media outreach program to take off, what does the industry have to do first? Well, the first thing they have to do is they have to create or come up with their own scientists. We've got to come up with an alternative science. So therefore, the first element in the media plan is to identify, recruit, and train a team of 5 independent scientists to participate in media outreach. We need a group of acknowledged experts in order to sign off on our positions. These will be individuals. I'm reading this directly from the document. These will be individuals who do not have a long history of visibility and or participation in the climate change debate. Unquote. These will be scientists, but they will not be scientists whose names are known as being involved in this particular debate. What's the advantage of that? The advantage of that is that there's no track record. There's no basis on which their credibility can be challenged. Their reputations in climate are flawless because they don't have any track record. So that means that our scientists are shielded from criticism. We are looking for a way to raise serious questions about the credibility of the scientists who are presenting the evidence that is hurting us. We want to attack their credibility. The only way we can do it is to come up with a group of scientists of our own whose credibility is flawless. And the only way we can do that is to make sure that while they are scientists, they do not have any history or visibility of participation in this debate. This team then will consist of new faces who will add their voice to those that are recognized, those who are already quite vocal in the debate. That'll be our first step. Then, as part of that, as an extension of that, our strategy is to develop a global climate science information kit for the media. A kit that includes peer-reviewed papers and undercuts the conventional wisdom on climate science. We need reputable presentations at reputable conferences by our scientists, which raise serious questions about their science, about the science being presented from the other side. This is our information kit. This is what we want to be able to put into the hands of the media. It will include fact sheets and will include documented evidence of scientific uncertainties in language that the media and the general public can understand. We don't want these people labeled as scientists who are speaking above the people we are trying to influence. We want scientists who are able to put what they've got to say into layman's terms, so to speak. The second thing we need to do, besides the information kit, we need to conduct briefings by media-trained scientists in the major media markets throughout the country. We need to have a concerted effort of outreach to the media. and I'm reading this directly from the document. Develop, disseminate radio news releases featuring scientists nationwide, and offer our scientists to appear on radio talk shows across the country. We want to take advantage of those media outlets that are likely to be most friendly to our positions. Talk radio. Rush Limbaugh and his troops, if you will. As part of this, we want to produce, distribute a steady stream of client science information. We want to distribute via syndicate to newspapers nationwide a steady stream of op-ed columns and letters to the editor authored by scientists. We want our people raising serious questions about credibility of the negative science. We want them on talk radio. We want them in the newspapers. We want them in op-ed pieces. We want them in letters to the editors in the major media outlets throughout the country. And I think this is particularly interesting because I think many of us are going to recognize this name. We need a prominent TV journalist to be our spokesman. We need to be able to reach somebody who's recognized nationally as a prominent, credible journalist to become spokesman for our side. The name they mention as an example or a possibility is John Stossel of ABC News. Obviously, they don't go to Fox. I mean, I think it's interesting that they don't go to Fox for their person because Fox, by definition, is already a little bit tainted in the minds of many people because of the clear ideological perspective that their broadcast and news presentations come from. But John Stossel is reputable. And so they mention him specifically as an example of somebody they would like to be able to reach as part of this campaign. So the first part, then, of this strategic plan is a national media relations program. The second part, I neglected to mention, the budget for this media outreach program, $600,000 plus paid advertising. The industry is talking about a program, a media information program, which is going to cost $600,000 plus paid advertising to go along with it. That's the media program. That's the media part of the program. The second part of the program is a global climate science information source, a data center, a global climate science data center in which people will be able to come for resources and data to defend the industry against the attacks. This science data center will be staffed with professionals on loan from various companies and associations with major interests in the climate issue. This data center will be ours. It'll be our people running it. And included in that center, and of course we'll use the latest things, we'll have kiosks, and we'll have videos, PR videos and all of those available, touch screen presentations, etc., where you can go to the data center. It'll be in Washington, D.C., and you'll be able to go and you'll be able to touch screen videos in order to get information and presentations in order to give you the kind of information you need to defend the industry. Included in the data that this data center will house is an overall history of climate science, congressional relations, and knowledge of where particular senators stand on the issue of climate. Because the goal here, the way that the American political process works, the goal here is to reach friends in the United States Senate, because by definition, the Kyoto Treaty requires Senate approval. So our target audience needs to be members of the Senate. So in this data center will be information about individual senators and where they stand on the climate issue. Also, in this center will be an opportunity to identify and recruit as many as 20 respected client scientists to serve on a science advisory board. We want scientists, people who are respected, people who have experience in relating to the media, relating to columnists and editorial writers. We want people who have expertise in grassroots organization and in campaign organization administration. We want people to go out, who can go out there and sell our point of view in a variety of different venues. This data center will be funded at a level which will guarantee its success. In short, this global climate data center will be a sound scientific alternative to what hard science is forcing us to deal with. As part of its efforts, its goal, the data center's goal, will be to maximize the impact of scientific views consistent with ours. The budget for this data center, $500 million. $500 million for the data center, $600,000 for the media outreach component of this plan. And the third part of the plan, with a $300,000 budget, is a direct outreach and education program aimed at Congress, aimed at state officials, aimed at industry's leadership, and aimed at school teachers and students. We want to get our point of view into the schools. We want to be able to impact in a positive way the teaching of science in our schools throughout the country. We want our data in the hands of teachers of science so that they can conduct science in a way which says there are two major positions on the issue of climate. There's the negative information on what's happening to the planet that hard science is giving us. And then there's this alternative point of view. The goal is to convince students not necessarily that we're right and they're wrong, but that our side is as legitimate as is theirs. Conclusion: there really isn't one answer to this. Because again, we don't have to win the debate. All we've got to do is punch enough holes in the other side to make sure that they don't win. And of course, the ultimate measure of success will be if the United States decides to not support Kyoto. In 2003, under President Bush, the United States rescinded its approval of Kyoto. And this petroleum industry group disbanded because it argued that its goals had been met. What, again, are its goals? American public opinion, the media, teachers of science, educators throughout the country, political leaders in legislatures and in Congress and in the United States Senate are so divided and so confused about what the hell is going on in science. That's all we wanted. We won. Can you believe this? This is me talking now. I'm not in that document anymore. Can you believe this? I've seen a very similar campaign happen here in West Virginia with coal. We have seen in the organizations, I mentioned this group before, the Friends of Coal, that have been able to influence the State Board of Education in such a way that pro-coal industry data, information, and propaganda is being introduced into our schools here in West Virginia, into our science classrooms. Now we have a legislature, a Republican-controlled legislature, because in the last fall elections, Republicans won control of the West Virginia legislature as well as the office of governor. So in the first legislative session they controlled, through the efforts of the American Legislative Exchange Council and its minions here in West Virginia, legislation was introduced directly relating to what the industry would like to see happen in our schools and classrooms here in West Virginia. We talk about quality of education and quality of life here in West Virginia and the tremendous strides that our kids are going to have to make in order to be competitive, not only with the rest of the country, but with the rest of the world. And instead of that, we are making our educational objectives industry-driven science, called hard science, called legitimate, which is so confusing our kids that they don't know what to believe. Our teachers don't know what to believe. One of the pieces of legislation, of course, was to rescind West Virginia's approval of Common Core. That was put on hold. They're going to come back. In fact, they're promising that in the next legislative session, beginning in January, they'll come back with legislation to totally repudiate Common Core. At this point, what they agreed to do was spend the intervening year collecting information and putting together an alternative set of standards that would be more reflective of the West Virginia way of life. I mean, can you believe this? This is what we're seeing and what we're talking about here. This is the industry plan. And millions of dollars were put on the table in order to make this plan viable. That's the overall strategy. But I would suggest that the meat of the program itself, the actual internal documents associated with various aspects of this plan and other plans, for example, one of the documents that has surfaced, that has been released by the Union of Concerned Scientists, is a series of internal memos and documents which indicates that as early as 1981, now the plan we just looked at was developed and put out for comment in April of 1998. 17 years earlier than that, in 1981, the Union of Concerned Scientists reports documents that indicate that Exxon, at that time, of course, in 81, Exxon and Mobil were not the same company. Exxon was a separate company. In 1981, Exxon already had memos which document the fact that the company knew that the science questioning the damage to the environment that the burning of fossil fuels was having on the planet was legitimate. An Exxon employee, as early as 1981, indicated that Exxon knew and shared with other members of the industry, BP, Chevron, Conoco, Peabody Energy, Phillips, Shell, that for 27 years the industry was documenting internally a decision to counter and to reject evidence which they acknowledged internally was legitimate evidence. What these documents released by the Union of Concerned Scientists show is, first, the companies have directly or indirectly spread climate disinformation for decades. Second, corporate leaders knew the reality of climate science. They knew that their products were harmful to people and to the planet. Yet they still actively deceived the public and denied this harm to the environment. And third, these documents indicate that this campaign of deception continues. Some of the documents in it are dated 2014 and 2015. In 1981, Exxon was looking to develop a gas field off the coast of Indonesia called the Natuna gas field. The company knew that the Natuna gas field was rich in carbon dioxide and that it would become the largest source point of carbon dioxide in the world. There was enough carbon dioxide in this particular gas field to comprise 1% of entire projections throughout the globe. It was the company's desire to develop this gas field that led it to adopt a strategy of disinformation in order to so confuse the public and discredit the science that they could effectively secure the right to develop this potential field of gas off the coast of Indonesia. In 1995, the same Exxon employee helped author one of the key documents that the industry developed. It is highlighted in the report. This particular employee ended up working for Mobil. And in it, he sent a message to the Global Client Coalition, a lobbying group for the fossil fuel industry. This memo, this 1995 memo, and remember, Exxon knew the damage to climate and to the planet that was being done as early as 1981, according to these documents. This is 1995. And Exxon and Mobil are engaged in a program to discredit that science, that data. This particular memo was distributed to representatives from member companies, warned unequivocally 20 years ago that burning the company's products was causing climate change, and that the relevant science is well established and cannot be denied. An internal 1995 document, which is distributed to the companies in the industry, which admits that 20 years ago we knew that there was evidence that could not be denied that what we are doing is destroying the planet. And even though they knew that, they continue to conduct this campaign of disinformation and misinformation for the general public. The president of the Union of Concerned Scientists, Ken Himmel, who is a former attorney and head of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, wrote a post blog about the report that companies missed an opportunity to take the lead in climate change. Quote, "Many fossil fuel companies haven't been honest about the harms that they have caused by extracting and selling products that place our climate in grave danger. Instead of taking responsibility, they have either directly or indirectly through trade and industry groups sown doubt about the science of climate change and fought efforts to cut emissions." Unquote. This is in 1995. But this document surfaced in 2014. And we need to know that the campaign we just looked at that was going to cost $6 million was undertaken by the American petroleum industry 3 years later in 1998. The only conclusion that we can reach is that the industry has known for close to 30 years that they were doing serious damage to the planet. Not only did they not do anything about it, they spent millions of dollars to confuse the general public, to influence the media, to affect the teaching of curriculum in our classrooms, in order to sow doubt. One of the most interesting documents to surface is the funding of a contrarian scientist at Smithsonian named Weehawken Willie Soon. For more than a decade, he received industry funding. His goal was to make the case that changes in the outer atmosphere around the sun and solar energy were the real cause of what was happening to the climate, not human behavior. The industry funded him for close to 2 decades through the Smithsonian. Nancy Cole, an author of the report of the Union of Concerned Scientists, penned the following quote: "These companies aren't just trying to block new policies. They're trying to roll back clean energy and climate laws that are working and are widely supported by the public. Climate change is already underway, and many communities are struggling to protect their residents and prepare for future changes. The deception simply must stop. It's time for major carbon companies to become part of the solution and cease to be responsible for the problem." I think this is absolutely incredible stuff. It raises serious questions if you look at the issue from a universal point, as a whole. If you look at the entire issue, it's clear that there are serious problems here. But if you look at the segments of the issue identified in some of these documents, if you look at the campaign to influence the way we teach science in our schools, all of us can see this locally. I can see it here in Appalachia. I see the influence of the Friends of coal groups on our classrooms, in our schools, on our school boards. We are doing a disservice to the way we educate our children. We are rendering our children incapable of accessing the global economy of the 21st century, because we're not even giving them the evidence. We're not even teaching them the facts. We're consciously setting out to confuse them, not educate them, for purposes that will do, I think, serious damage to the quality of education that they receive. There's one particular document, one particular dossier, if you will, in all of these documents released that is of particular interest to me because I happen to live in coal country. It is the one document, one deception document in this dossier of recently released documents that pertains directly to coal. All of it occurred in 1991. So we're talking about a document that pertains to a campaign or a program that was conducted by coal 24 years ago. The campaign began in 1991. It ended in 1991. Because once the general public was made aware of what it was doing and the strategies that it was employing to get its point of view out there, the general public turned on this program to the point that those who orchestrated the campaign began to run for cover. The fact that it was 24 years ago, in 1991, that this entire initiative took place may seem to suggest that it's old history. But I have to say that what makes it significant is that the documents themselves just became public. These are 24-year-old documents that we just are finding out about now, thanks to the Union of Concerned Scientists. In coal, this is a coal-directed campaign to establish an organization called the Information Council on the Environment. Information Council on the Environment. ICE. ICE. The acronym is ICE. How ironic that a PR campaign conducted by the coal industry is known as ICE. The organization, ICE, was set up in 1991, according to this document, which is Deception Dossier number 5 in the collection. And in this document, ICE is founded in 1991 with the express purpose of deceiving the public about climate science. Like oil and gas industry, the coal industry put forth scientist spokespeople, ran ad campaigns through ICE. This, in miniature, in coal country, was a mirror of the larger campaign undertaken 7 years earlier by the American petroleum industry itself. ICE's advertising campaign was funded to the tune of $500,000. It was, and I'm reading directly from the document, its purpose was designed to disparage climate science and cherry-pick the data to highlight claims of cooling temperatures in order to confuse the public. Print and radio ads presented climate science as alarmist and out of touch with reality. One advertisement that ran in Appalachia, that ran in coal country during this period, showed on television a sailing ship about to drop off the edge of a flat world and into the jaws of a waiting dragon. The headline to the ad read, "Some say the earth is warming. Some also said the earth was flat," unquote. In 1991, ICE put the following advertisement on the Rush Limbaugh radio program. Quote, "Stop panicking. I'm here to tell you," says Rush, "that the facts simply don't jibe with the theory that catastrophic global warming is taking place. Try this fact on for size. Minneapolis has actually gotten colder. So has Albany, New York." Unquote. I remember these campaigns. I remember those who set out to disparage and discredit climate science by pointing out, who continue to do that, by pointing out, for example, that the city of Boston this past winter set a record with more than 100 total inches of snowfall. How can you argue climate science in the face of that kind of contrary evidence? In other words, what the industry is doing is emphasizing what seem to be contradictions to climate science, not to discredit the science outright, as much as to create doubt and raise serious questions about the legitimacy of hard science. This is what it's about. In tomorrow's program, we've reached the end of today's program. It's 1 minute before the top of the hour, 1 minute before 3 here in the East. In tomorrow's program, which I remind you will begin 1/2 hour later, it'll begin at 1:30 in the East tomorrow afternoon, we're going to pick up on this particular issue and look at a couple of specific documents, dossiers, from this particular collection. One will be the ICE documents on coal. Another will be a document on the activities of the American Legislative Exchange Council and its involvement in this entire campaign. And then the third one will be an internal document which was originally created by the industry to discredit hard science, but in fact, whose conclusions are that we can't discredit hard science because it's too real. And so, in essence, what the industry did was exclude entire paragraphs from the document in order to hide even their own evidence, which tended to suggest that hard science was right. It is the top of the hour. It is 3 p.m. in the East. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Thank you.